Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to part 2 of the I Am Black Juneteenth experience. I hope that part 1 exceeded your expectations in providing enlightenment to the Black man's experience in the 21st century. We're now ready to dive into a robust and progressive conversation with one goal: keep the current momentum going until we truly create a United States. I'm your host, Angel Livas, and I think it's only right that I explain why the men selected for tonight's panel was imperative to our discussion. First, this platform, I Am Black, wasn't even a concept 3 weeks ago. When God planted the seed, he also showed me who was needed to create impact around this discussion. Every man present answered the call and didn't even require an in-depth explanation. As a mother of 2 young boys, this dialogue isn't just a conversation for me. It's a true attempt to do my part to ensure that the road to 2024 and 2025 look different than 2020. You see, in 4 or 5 years, someone might look at my sons and label them as a threat. So I've decided to use my gift, my talents, to do my part. By the end of this conversation, it's my prayer that you will see how you can do the same. I'm grateful to share the stage with some of America's most beloved Black men because of their commitment to not only their communities, but also to their purpose. I know that we're off to a wonderful start tonight, and so allow me to introduce you to our participants. First, I'm going to start with Mr. Paul Bache Williams. He is our mental health expert and the CEO of Hearts and Mind Counseling. Dr. Eddie Connor Jr. is the recipient of the President Barack Obama Volunteer Service Award and the President Obama Lifetime Achievement Award. Mr. Tommy Dortch Jr. is the chairman of 100 Black Men of America. Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley is senior pastor of Alfred Street Baptist Church. And Dr. Michael Eric Dyson is a New York Times bestselling author, Georgetown University professor, and most importantly, he hails from my hometown of Detroit, Michigan. I know that there were a number of questions that already started coming in through the documentary, and we're actually going to start there. And this question, I guess we can route it to Bache. The question is, how do we talk racism with our children?
Hi, everybody. I think we have to be, well, I know we have to be honest. So we talk about how racism impacts us. Like, we can't shield our kids because if they find out from the world that what racism feels like, they might be afraid to come to us to talk about it. So if we're going to talk about my son, who's 15-year-old, who doesn't really understand what racism is, hasn't experienced it, I need to have a conversation with him on so many different levels. Not just the surface level, but how it impacts you, because it can slow your development. You know, we walk around, we experience racism, it shows up in other areas of our lives, and we don't address it, we don't deal with it. So we have different things, how we respond to it, like anger or anxiety. It shows up in our body as sometimes our stomach hurts or headaches or cramps or whatever it is, it's in our body, the things that we experience. So trauma is very real. And so really understanding what trauma is, there's 3 different types of trauma that we'll get into. So there's acute, and maybe a single incidence of racism, right? And then we have complex trauma, which is I'm experiencing racism myself. I'm seeing it on TV. My friends are talking about it. My community is talking about it. Wherever I go, there's complex trauma that's on top of all the other things that's happening in the world. So yeah, we really need to have these conversations with our kids and be honest with them. We can't really sugarcoat, because if we feel like we're not telling them and we're protecting them, the world is not going to protect them. So what they really need to understand, that what's really happening, it's real. It's not just on TV, it's right here.
True. Is there any other panelists that would like to add to that?
Well, as a father of 2 sons, you know, I kind of wrestle with this. The other day, my son went out to ride his bike, and I almost flipped, you know, thinking about Ahmaud Arbery and wondering, you know, is my son's life at risk? And it made me realize, kind of as Bache was saying, that I need to have these conversations. But for me, it needed to be more than simply identifying a single incident, but getting them to see some systemic things that are happening presently. I think we're very easily can negate 1 or 2 instances until we begin to paint a bigger picture and then connect that historically so that they have an awareness really of the world they're in as young Black men, that they've inherited, that there is a racism thread that has woven itself into the fabric of America. And in order for them to really conceive it, I need them to see it as bigger than 1 incident. And I want to be able to show them historically So to be able to take them through some Eyes on the Prize series, to make them understand what was happening with Emmett Till, what the 16th Street bombing was all about. So, to trace these moments through our history so that they have a real conscious awareness that this is not just something that happened and it's not limited to one incident in Georgia, but this is something historic they've been dealing with, so that they have a racial consciousness of their role in surviving and helping change this nation.
And I'd like to add in part of my approach to teaching. I have children and grandchildren. And part of preparing them is, one, making sure they understand their history. Because one of our problems we have is too many of our young people has historic as opposed to history. And so I have a library that teaches all of my children and grandchildren and other young people who come in contact with me and my mentees, so they know their history first, so they have the confidence. And then the other is to speak truth to power. We have to tell them what we've been through. Unlike my brothers here, I was born in 1950, so I lived in segregated communities. I'm 70 years old. I've been through those cases where they didn't want Black folks to come in the front door, and all of my parents taught me, son, you don't need to go there. If they don't want you there, you don't need to be there anyway. So don't take your money and don't go to them. And so we have to teach that to our young people and make sure we are at least preparing them for the future. Because I used to tell my son, my youngest, who told me, oh, Dad, that was back when you were growing up. And then once he got profiled, then all of a sudden he wanted to be militant. But I had to step in and I had to say to him, look, Trey, if you get stopped, I'm the heavy, not you. Be respectful. It's not going to hurt you to say yes, sir, there, because your dad will deal with it from there. But those are the things we have to prepare our young folks for, because we're in a world that is true and full of racism and, of course, classism as well.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned was the financials and having an understanding around that. And I think that's definitely a place that I want us to go. When we think about the Montgomery bus boycott, we really had to hit America where it would hurt, and that was in the pockets. How important is it to really kind of wheel in some of our historic past successes into how we move things forward as a country now?
Well, Dr. King and his leadership really hit it on the nail. First of all, the civil disobedience was one that they understood back then, that police were just waiting to shoot and beat and whatever. But Maynard Jackson taught us, because his father and grandfather taught him, that Black people will get ahead in this nation through the ballot, the buck, and the book. And if you consider now we generate $1.3 to $1.4 trillion a year, what we've got to do is educate our children, educate our community that a powerful weapon that we have is our money. And the other is the vote that we have, and we have to use those, and then we have to be educated. But be honest, corporate America, America does not really take notice until you hit them in the pocketbooks, until you finally kick them out of office.
Dr. Dyson, do you have something you would like to add?
Well, yeah. First of all, I'm glad to be on this panel, and I'm glad you got my pastor on here because I can't cuss now. But what?
Oh, you've done it a lot of times, brother. We good.
You ain't supposed to out me like that, Pastor. You're not supposed to out me like that. So the thing is, we're dealing with what Dr. Wesley called systemic racism, and what Brother Dortch has referred to as the deeply ingrained pattern of racial oppression, and what Brother Bashir talked about in terms of trauma. All of that is hitting us. And so, you can never predict when a historical eruption will last beyond the moment to create the conditions for a movement. T.J. Jemison in Baton Rouge had a bus boycott. Claudette Colvin, before Rosa Parks, had a conflagration and a conflict on a bus, but she was a young Black woman with other complicating factors, some of which had to do with respectability politics, and some had to do with the fact she was cussing. And, on the one hand, people put it on Black people to say we're obsessed with respectability politics, but the fact is, we know that white America right now must have a perfect victim in order to allow us to die in peace. And even then, posthumously, they're exhuming our bones to re-indict us for something that they are supposed to be, like Nostradamus about. Like when the policeman was shooting at this particular figure, he knew his entire record. It's poppycock. So having said all that, you can never tell when a particular moment will inspire people to move forward. And so in that sense, yes, you must grasp hold of the historic legacy that we've produced as a people. We got to look at those past events. I'm a father and a grandfather too. I see young people out there with the sign, "I am not my ancestors." Slow down, Mace, you're killing them. The point is, your ancestor is Nat Turner too. Your ancestor is Gabriel Prosser. So first of all, it lets me know you don't know what their ancestors are. Secondly, don't implicitly dog people who kept silent so you could speak. Like, I'm 61 years old, and when we used to go from Detroit down south, as we said, I used to ask my daddy, why can't we stop at the darn place like everybody else stopped? And we had to have a mason jar under the seat to relieve ourselves and a brown paper bag and a sandwich. So I was subject to the tyranny of American apartheid as well. And so those people now who project themselves back into history, you would have been an ancestor. You would have been dead in your grave. We'd have been singing at your funeral, and Dr. Wesley's daddy would have been preaching over you. So the reality is that we sometimes have amnesia ourselves about the plight and predicament of Black people. And so we need to access that history, but with a more complicated and nuanced way. We ain't got to imitate it, because there are different conditions now. But what's interesting about Black Lives Matter is the corollary of SNCC to a certain degree, right? In terms of, they don't have leaderless organizations, they just don't have one leader, they got many. So you had John Lewis, you had Diane Nash, you had Jim Bevel, you had Marion Barry, you had Cleveland Sellers, you had a whole constituency, and Bob Moses coming up later, Mississippi, in '64. So you had a constituency and a contingent of leaders who were projecting themselves in a very serious fashion. And I think that what you see now with Black Lives Matter is comparable to that. I will say this before shutting up, though. I know a lot of people say, yeah, we got the Black Lives Matter, which is great, and I love them. We don't need the old preachers and all that old stuff. Al Sharpton's still on the job. Jesse Jackson's still holding on. You got new younger leaders like Reverend Dr. Wesley, who gave a tremendous sermon and burst on even more of a national scene, politically speaking, because of his insistence on uniting the gospel and justice. So we ain't ethnosaurs over here. We have not gone the way of the dodo. We need both and, not either or. We need concentrated attention to social injustice from the pulpit and from the business community. And we need the kind of aggravating, in the most positive sense of that word, aggressive engagement on the streets with Black Lives Matter and the policy recommendations. So yeah, we need to have that history. We need to pull upon it. We don't need to be victims of it. We don't need to be captives of it, but we certainly should have a more complicated and nuanced conception of what that history is.
Now, a lot of people have been talking about dismantling the police systems, the infrastructure, and to some it seems absolutely necessary. What is the number one structural factor? And this question is going to go to everyone. What is the number one structural factor that you believe needs to be modified, and why? Pastor Wesley, we can start with you.
So for me, I am not well versed in all policing, but I will say this: qualified immunity has got to be challenged, because murder is murder, and police are not charged to murder the innocent nor the guilty. So as Dr. Dyson talked about us being posthumously exhumed and looking at records, and this criminalization of the victim, none of that justifies police murder. I could be guilty as sin. Police job is not to kill me. And so what bothered me, Angel, so much about Derek Chauvin is he knew he was being filmed, smiles in the camera, has no remorse whatsoever, because qualified immunity has already told him, you're not going to be prosecuted for this. And even when the state's attorney for Minnesota comes out and says the charges have been filed, he has to qualify it and say, but we're probably not going to get a conviction. In spite of what we saw, because that blue shield, and again, not suggesting that all officers are bad, but to suggest that there's a qualified immunity that allows this type of blatant killing with evidence and still be exonerated and walk, that law has to be changed. So for me, I'm pressing for legislation to challenge, if not absolutely remove, qualified immunity from police officers?
Okay. Eddie?
You know, I have to first say thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to share. Of course, Reverend Jeremiah Wright said there's nothing wrong with being a copycat as long as you know the right cat to copy. Indeed, and in fact, to be surrounded by all these brilliant luminaries and leaders, these are the incredible cats. You know, if you really think about it, the etymological origin of policing is firmly really entrenched and founded in slave patrols. It's convict leasing, it's slave codes, and it was all about controlling Black bodies, Black people, because we've always been seen as a threat. Literally, our skin has become America's sin, and has been seen as a sin. And if those sworn to protect and serve are doing everything but that, now we're seeing really, it's the meeting out of punishment, it's the meeting out of subversive aggression, and really the infrastructure has to be reformed. I got to give a shout out to my main man from the D, Dr. Dyson, who understands what up though, but also understands that $294 million in the city of Detroit is spent on policing. Only $9 million of those dollars is spent in the health community for the health department. And then you think about it, ironically, policing is putting our health and our well-being at risk. And there's no social distancing from killing Black bodies. There's no flattening the curve of police brutality. And so defunding really, I think, is about a reinvestment and a redistribution of resources, where we really move from aggressive policing and incarceration to building, as Dr. Eddie Glaude declared, a public infrastructure of what it is that he mentioned of care. So that's immersed in refunding education. That's immersed in refunding social services, refunding the health departments. And I think as we redistribute that wealth into depressed communities and Black businesses, essentially now what is the new policing praxis and how will it be really put into practice so that we don't have a continued Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, so on and so forth. So I think it has to be reimagined, and I think it has to be reformed.
Lachey?
For me, of course, everything is mental health, right? If you think about a police officer that's willing or able or has the wherewithal to put their knee on somebody's neck and sit there and smile, there's something going wrong cognitively, right? So psychologically, where are you at? And you devalue, you don't see another human as a human. You don't see a Black man as a human. So what's going on there? So more assessments. They need to have these assessments where I can really see where you are if, you know, because they go through different things, right? You have to have your mindset on, I got to go out every day and I got to feel like that I might die today. So I'm in this mindset that today might be the day, so I'm protecting everything that I have. But even before you sign up for that, what is your understanding of life in general? What is your understanding of, I'm going on this job and I'm here to protect, not just to protect me, but the people that I see? What is your understanding psychologically of the Black man, the Black community? Am I connected to that? Am I, my education, cultural competence, and not the cultural competence that we learn in school, because that's not really cultural competence, because that's just allowing myself to understand. But do I really understand the plight of the Black man? Do I really understand the plight of the Black community? From a connection of spirituality, from a human aspect, historically, all those different things that we tend to skip because I don't know how long their assessment process is when becoming an officer. I hear sometimes you can just have a diploma. I hear sometimes they take a test that shows, a psychological test, and that shows that if something bad happens, they can get up the next day and do it again. That's not the type of testing that we're talking about. But
Sorry, let me ask you this real quick. Sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things that one of the officers talked about in the documentary was the psyche of the officers and how when they're in training and they are shooting at the targets in target practice, it's a silhouette of a Black man, and how that plays a role in how they interact and engage with Black people. How should we be looking at that also and saying, hey, we need to change some of these kind of subliminal messages that are being portrayed in the system when they are going through training, while they're, you know, before they're going out into the field even.
Right, it's almost like it's normalized, right? So you're telling them what you're shooting at is what you're supposed to be shooting at. You're constantly in practice, because just like as a sports player, as a basketball becomes muscle memory. So the same thing happens with you psychologically and mentally. Now it's just muscle memory. I see the black target and I'm shooting. It's no disconnect from the human, from the emotion. It's just a response. So we really need to have, again, more assessments. We need to check in and see what's really going on psychologically.
Would you like to add to that, Dr. Dyson?
Yeah, I think everything said here is extremely important. What Dr. Wesley talked about in terms of qualified immunity that led to what we might call racial sadism. This is a sadistic obsession with denying the black body breath, right? And isn't it interesting that there's a convergence between the pandemic of race and the pandemic of COVID-19, right? COVID-16, 19, COVID-19. And what you got there is the similar phrase, I can't breathe. That is the characteristic symptom within the deep and profound infestation of the virus, as well in terms of the COVID, as well as Black people being unable to breathe the oxygen of air, of freedom. And so the thing is that I think what put Black people over the edge is, as Dr. Wesley said, we're sitting there, the guy's looking at the camera, he might as well have been stepping on a bug. He might as well have been swatting a fly. It was as normalized as can be. And think about Hannah Arendt in her book, Eichmann on Trial, when she talked about the banality of evil. And a lot of people got mad at her because they thought she was trying to say Eichmann, who's doing all this crazy stuff, was being denied his evil. That ain't what she was saying. She was saying that Eichmann was an apparatchik. He was just doing his job. And the policeman, in one sense, is just doing his job. The reason we have to defund the police, and think about it, the LAPD has now shifted, what, $150 million, right, of its budget. Look at Camden, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey got rid of the police. And I think that Chauvin pushed us all to the left, so to speak. Right, we were before, let's do reform, let's have citizens councils that oversee the police, let's figure out a way to reform them from within, let's have police living in neighborhoods, the community policing. But when you're looking at a cat, this ain't about policy, this is about a culture. And if you dehumanize Black people in your mind, that's what the silhouette is about. The silhouette is about like a game, and you're playing target practice, and the Black body is the target, so that any Black body will do. So this is why Dr. Wesley is worried about his son living in upper Black middle class America with the finest gifts and talents at their disposal, with a community of like-minded Black people supporting them, but on any day they can be degraded immediately to a thing, a cog in the machinery of white supremacy, whether it's conscious or not. And at this point, it don't make no difference, because what they're doing is having a reflex that is demonizing and targeting Black people. So the police, I think, have to be challenged in a fundamental way. We can shift these resources. Why, when you call 911, are you sending a cop to deal with a mental health issue? These cops are not trained in, the DSI. They're not trained in identifying schizophrenia. They don't know what bipolar or affect is. They don't know what, borderline personality is. So their response is a gun, whereas what we might need is a de-escalating tactic that says, let me speak to this person, let me calm them down. And as bad as the George Floyd was, I mean, look at the Brooks killing in Atlanta. Equally chilling. Here's a guy for 45 minutes. Hey man, how you doing? Yes, sir. Hey, all the stuff we tell that Tommy Dortch is talking to his children about, right? Our sons become situational sellouts. That's good. You let me be the heavy, 10, 2, put your wallet out before they come, put it on the dashboard so you won't have to reach into your pocket. All of the things we tell them to do, Philando Castile did it, still got shot. Here, Mr. Brooks is doing everything possible, saying, hey, I'm a human being. I'm so sorry. Let me explain what's going on. And he still was murdered. This is why we have to do away, I think, we have to abolish the existing framework within which policing takes place. And if that's qualified immunity, that needs to be done legally. Although you saw what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court just said the other day, they ain't looking at that. They don't care about that. They turned down all them cases, right, that suggested that this would be the case. So we got a long way to go. And before we can get qualified immunity, then let's take it another direction. Let's get rid of these police departments, figure out ways to have public safety still. And guess what? In Atlanta, half the police force didn't show up. Dig this. The day after, the two officers were charged. Now that lets me know, first of all, they always talking about they can't get nobody to cooperate with them in the hood because it's a no snitching on. Y'all got the worst no snitch in history. Y'all don't snitch on nobody. And then you mad because we don't let you kill black people. We're upset. You won't let us do our job. We are to kill Negroes. We are to exterminate these black roaches. And so when we oppose that, when we say, no, we are human beings, now the Atlanta Police Department is up in arms. I say, let them go. Half the folk didn't show up. The city didn't burn down. The city didn't erupt. I think we can shift the paradigm and come up with new understandings of what policing is. We don't have to reimagine. We got to unimagine the police. And when we unimagine their existence, then we fill in the blanks with very practical solutions that will solve our public safety conundrum while keeping black people alive.
Well, let's go to Atlanta where Mr. Dortch is. Tommy, what are your thoughts on all of this? And even if we are to remove the police, as Dr. Dyson just mentioned, what would that look like?
Well, first of all, it won't work to abolish police departments. And people have taken, you got to reorganize, you got to have stricter, I think, practices. But when folks say defunding the police department, they're not saying abolish it. They're saying redirect a lot of these resources in the appropriate place into communities and things. I know that your president in the White House would love to have police departments abolished so he can send the military in. He'd love to have this whole area disrupted for the next few months so he can have a police state. But that's not going to happen, not going to work. Brother Brooks, who was murdered in Atlanta, I think the white police officer was embarrassed because this young brother who stood there, if you watch the video on him, he was calm. I mean, he was intoxicated. Okay, that's no reason to kill a man. And he could have even walked his home from where he was. And if you trained police right, you had his car, you had his ID, you knew where he was. And so the problem was, I think that officer was embarrassed that in that tussle, he took his taser. And a taser is not a lethal weapon. And even the officer was close enough to shot him in the leg if he just had to shoot somebody. He fired his weapon 3 times. But what really angered me was after he had shot Brother Brooks, one kicked him and the other had his foot on his shoulder. And now people can say what they want. There's some that Keisha shouldn't be doing what she's doing. I believe in zero tolerance. When we had the first march, 6 police officers were charged and indicted. 4 of those 6 were black. Because we got to also make sure our people understand, don't have your ass out in the street acting like the rest of these folks. But she moved immediately and they're dealing with them. And these 2 have been indicted, 11 counts. And so what we have to have is zero tolerance. You know, I'm working with Karen Bass and the Congressional Black Caucus, and they have a new bill called Justice and Policing Act 2020. And they're creating a national registry. So any police officer who has all of these charges or cases are against him, you will have a national directory to know, one, he killed or he shot or beat folks in Cleveland like they've had, and then the guy goes to the next jurisdiction. That's important. We've got to also understand that federal government is not the only place, or the Supreme Court. Local governments can deal with these issues. That's why, like the DAs down in Brunswick, when Brother Arbery, you know, first of all, the first DA refused to indict or incarcerate the murderer, and I call him a murderer because he worked in their department. They sent it to another DA. He refused to indict because his son worked with the murderer. And then the third DA refused to indict because he was trying to find a way out. And he had a tape for 30 days, the one all of us saw in this nation. And as they say, my boy Stevie Wonder could have seen that they murdered my boy Arbery. But it took that, and so all of us got involved. It was a collective effort of all of our communities that put the pressure on. I sent my young brother, my minister, Jamal Bryant, down to Brunswick to sit. See, I'm in that age group. I can't be in crowds. So I don't jump in crowds now. I know COVID-19 is here. But we put a mass and effort. But the bottom line for us is that we do need to redirect a lot of these resources. The Fulton County jail system spends $100 million a year to keep people incarcerated. And my brother understands 85% of the people in jail here in Fulton County have some kind of mental challenge. They need to take some of the resources and address mental illness and mental challenges in our community and these police officers. They need to do more screening of them, but zero tolerance has got to be there. So the bottom line, yes, we need to redirect funds. We need to also change the policies. We need to get rid of city council people and others who don't do their job, and that's black or white. If you're going to elect your police department, because the mayor appoints the chief of police, and the city council deals with appropriations once the budget come in. So we got to hold everybody accountable and not just simply say it's the police department, all of these folks. And we need to vote from the DAs. We need to get them out of the office. People need to know the importance of district attorneys, need to know the importance of having good judges and prosecutors. So what we got to do is an educational piece, but we've got to get bad police out, and we got to get bad elected officials out, because they aren't doing their job either.
We definitely move the needle towards how we can solve this problem. Dr. Dyson, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, very briefly. I got to push back on my good friend, Tommy Dortch. We've tried that before, Tommy. What you're saying is repeating what has already been said. It's not what you've said is word for word what people say in the midst of a crisis when something like this occurs. It is clear that getting DAs to be held accountable. In the Arbery case, we know what happened. Three times they moved it because the police are in bed with the prosecutors. So we know already that they're not going to charge somebody with whom they work. The office itself has to be obliterated. Now, when people get scared, oh, no, we can't do that because we get rid of the police. What we going to do? What is we going to do? First of all, most police don't respond to what you think they do. They're not out there dealing with catching the bad guys. Most police deal with noise complaints, cats in trees, or pavement Patty or Becky or Karen calling somebody on the cops. That's what mostly they do. The disproportionate concentration of what Foucault called the carceral state, and you talked about it, putting black bodies in prisons, putting black bodies in jails. You have to have a radical reorientation. And in one sense, you got halfway there. The argument you're making is for the abolition of a police department, not that we don't have public safety, but the concentration of these figures, legalized hoodlums who are empowered with the imprimatur of the state, a badge and a gun, to hurt and brutalize black people is now to such an excessive state that nothing you've suggested will in any way stop people on the preventive end from killing black people. But if we remove them as a policing force, as a marauding, occupying force that Dr. King talked about, the white man's cop, and what they're doing in these communities, then we have the possibility of stopping this. Because what we're doing right now is all after the fact. What is the justice for Arbery? What is the justice for Brooks? What is the justice for Floyd? We have to have enforced martyrs in order to get us to see that the policing itself systemically has become so corrupt. It's not a matter of intention or will, it's a matter of what the system is producing. So I think you've made a very profound and eloquent argument for the abolition of those police. Nothing short of that is going to stop us. And we'll be here next year, and we'll be here the year after that, talking about what we got to do in the police and how the mayor has to appoint this and the district attorney and so on. No, if we reassign value, if we refund and then defund one and then refund the other, we can redistribute within the existing panoply of departments, with the exception of the police, have public safety in order, and then do it. There have been many people who have thought hard and long about this. Maybe the language could be changed. I understand that. But I tell you, if we do what we're doing right now, we're going to have the same dead black bodies to account for in the offing.
So what can we agree on? What can we say? Here are some solutions. Here are some potential tactics that we can rally together and start moving forward with. I know a number of people, one question from a viewer is, how do we really create change, and how long will it take when systems were created against us? Where do we start? I don't know if I want either one of y'all to talk anymore. I'm trying to.
Mike and I hang. We hang. We Reverend Dr. Evangelist Michael Eric Dyson. That's my brother. But I think in terms of effecting change, one is seeing young people. I think we've heard all of us talk about one, having voices and people in the streets first. When people get uncomfortable, when you get them out of their comfort zone, they get nervous. You look at corporate America is dumping billions of dollars now out here, and dumping those billions is not going to change things. It's got to be targeted and it's got to be directed, because in 2 months or 3 months, the same problem is going to be here. And that's what Michael said. You look at what they came with Congress dumping all of this money, and for 2 months and 3 months, and then folks still going to have economic challenges. So the same thing is, we got to continue the efforts in the streets. You got to have people at the table. You're going to have people registering. And what I really like is these young leaders are registering people to vote at all of these rallies. But the key now is to get them out, to get them moving. It's going to be a combination of things. It's not one thing that's going to change this. But I can tell you now, people are afraid. People are now listening. And people right now, when I did the CNBC, they want to talk about the economy. You can't talk about an economy. Economy is not going to come back if you don't solve these problems that are in front of us now. And so I think as we talk about solutions, the key thing has got to be activism, engagement, and involvement. And you got to have the elders in the village. You got to have the new leaders in the village. You got to have everybody, business owners, the faith community. We all got to all work together to change what's here. And that's the way. People got to be uncomfortable.
Pastor Wesley, is there something you'd like to add?
No, I'm enjoying the Michael and Tommy going back and forth with it. For me, I think one, I want to note the small elements of change that we've begun to see. So it sounds minor, but here, like in Virginia, when we start removing these Confederate statues, that we're calling society and community to accountability for vestiges and ideologies of racism that allow it to continue to be embedded. Sounds like small things, but pulling down these Confederate statues I almost dropped my jaw to hear that NASCAR is banning the Confederate flag. Okay, yeah, a couple hundred years too late, but praise be the Lord, that these signs of the systemic racism. And I think what's happening is that as this racism has been exposed through social media, because we all know until that video went viral, Georgia was not doing anything until social media forced it, capturing people on video, the movement of people in the streets. Now we're challenging white fragility and subconsciousness. So Drew Brees makes his statement and players push right back. Goodell retracting on Kaepernick. Hell, even Donald Trump came out and said Kaepernick ought to have a chance to play again. And, I'm not going to put no weight in that, but we're seeing these small movements and progressions that lead me to believe we are on the right track. Now it's got to happen legislatively. Now it's got to happen with the dismantling of the police. Now it's got to happen in this voting. And I hope that those who do vote realize that it's not just about Donald Trump. That, look, the president affects very little change at the community level. We're talking about city council. We're talking about district attorneys. We're talking about your mayors. We're talking about, all those smaller levels that we have to be engaged in voting. But I see the momentum going. So I say let's continue to press it. But we are seeing signs that this is not just an outburst of anger over George Floyd's death, but that people are pressing, and there's a consciousness that's being awakened even within our white brothers and sisters, that they're acknowledging, okay, there's a real problem here. And there's a line in the sand, and you cannot stand in the gray area anymore. Either you're on the right side of justice or on the wrong. And if you're on the wrong, we're going to call you out about it. We're going to hold you accountable for it. You're going to have to pay the cost. You cannot mimic George Floyd's death and keep your job at FedEx. That is not acceptable. And I'm grateful that we're seeing the termination of those who thought that they could hide and shelter their racist mindset and ideology with no consequence. We are now having to force people to pay a consequence and a cost for this blatant racism.
So what are, go ahead, Bashay.
I was going to add to that. So what we're describing is called righteous anger, right? So we're afraid, you use the word anger. So what righteous anger is, it seeks restoration, and that's exactly what we're seeking. Before, we called it unrighteous anger, which seeks destruction. We're not looking for destruction. We're maybe looking for destruction of the way the system is being handled or being run, but the righteous anger seeks restoration. So that's what everybody's describing. We need to embrace that and really understand that, because it's intimidating, yes, to the people who are abusing us, to the people who are taking advantage of us. But we understand what the power comes in with us being angry, like, I'm stopping this. This is no longer acceptable. In the Bible, it talks about it, right? I can speak to it better than I can when Jesus went into the temple, right? That was righteous anger. It's okay. We need to understand and have these things stop in front of us, for us, by us, whatever we need to do. We need to band together, continue to do what everyone else is saying.
Eddie?
I would say, Malcolm X said, that's not a chip on my shoulder, that's your foot on my neck. In this instance, it's a knee that's become a noose. You think about the Minneapolis police officer Chauvin. If you think about that, he's chauvinistic. It speaks to patriotism. It speaks to privilege. There's chauvinism, but there's no chivalry at all. There was no love that was even shed abroad in that. Reverend Dr. Wesley mentioned the whole aspect that COVID-19 revealed how sick this nation really is. If you think about it, it literally took a virus to reveal how sick America was, not to us as Black people, but to America. And now we're actually asked to begin to vaccinate and cure what we didn't even create. And so when you think about the psyche of it all, to be Black in America, as James Baldwin said, is to be relatively conscious and to be in a rage almost all the time. The righteous indignation, as Brother Bashe mentioned about, is now become in many cases like a Molotov cocktail. It's become flammable. You see the fury, you see the fire, you see the frustration. And I think with that now, that anger now has to turn, as we're seeing it, into action. We're seeing the demonstration, but demonstration without legislation is just a walk in the park and you're just taking an exercise. So I think with that protest comes policy. Now, more than just putting our feet to the streets, now we got to begin to put pen to paper, and we got to begin to hold people accountable more than ever before, and really begin to think about that, and really transmute, transpose, but understand that our Black unity is not in our separation, but it's about us unraveling our trauma and then getting to the aspect of transformation.
Now, one of the things that I want to add to this is we've had a number of things, as Pastor Wesley mentioned, that is leading us in a more progressive direction. If you think about the protesters, it's no longer just Black people out there. It is a multitude of races and ethnicities that are joining us and saying we're standing in solidarity with you. One of the things that have come back to me is, okay, Angel, we stand with Black people and we want to show our solidarity, but how do we do this? Yes, we can go to the polls in November, but what can we do right now? And so what I would love for each of you to do is to share a tactic. We're gonna keep this quick or I will cut y'all off. I'm saying, give me y'all a warning shot, okay? Give us like an idea of something that they can be doing right now. I know last night I was talking to Mr. Dortch, and his suggestion was, from our past, one of the things that was successful was building coalitions. So is that something that's viable where people can start building their own independent coalitions where they can say, this is the one particular area that we want to focus on, and you head in that direction and you lead your camp in that direction while somebody else focuses on something else? Just want to get y'all opinions. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Dyson, but like I said, I will cut you off.
I mean, why the hostility and the aggression?
What you mean? I can't hear you.
Why the hostility and the aggression? I mean,
it's tough being a Black man in America, isn't it, Michael?
I'm gonna tell you two things. Get rid of the police. That's a practical and consequential thing we can do, because look, this thing don't last forever. So while we're here together, we might as well shine forever. Sorry, I had to hit the ditty. But here's the point. Martin Luther King Jr., bus boycott, 56, King died 68, 12 years. We ain't got but a minute. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know how long white largesse will happen. We don't know. We don't want just you to take Aunt Jemima off the dadgum pancake box. We want to stop you from flattening out the horizon of our hope and shrinking our potential. The police are the greatest threat to Black existence. This is why Negroes are hitting the street even during a pandemic when they know they can lose their lives, because they understand that the greatest pandemic is the one for which there is no vaccine. And that is the hatred of Black people. So I'm saying to you, this is the time. We cannot let up. As Dr. Wesley talked about dismantling the cops, we have got to do that. We have got to do that in a very practical sense, and people are now willing to listen. Even with Brother Dortch, we can convince him, all right, we can use a different word than abolition. We can do that. We old enough to throw him a bone and say, we're just trying to arrange the logic. and rationale of aggressive militarization of police because they've been militarized. This was happening under Obama out in Ferguson when they were having the leftovers from Iraq brought in to the cities, and these police departments are with the warrior mentality. If we can stop that, that's the greatest thing that's going to help Dr. Wesley's kids and our kids and grandkids is to stop these police from killing us. And the second practical thing I'm going to do, I'm going to convert Dr. Wesley to my viewpoint all the way, and I'm going to convert Jamal Bryant to my, I'm going to come down to your church and preach a sermon in your church that Bryant is going to agree with. And when I get great geniuses going at it, Doc, we're going to be, and Connor, I don't know if he's a Baptist preacher or not, but he's flowing smooth with the metaphoric intensity going over there. And Dr. Bechet, with his mental, cool kind of mental health thing, we could turn this jack upside down. That's what I'm thinking. Convert them two black genius preachers and stop the police. That's my plan.
Okay. Let's first start that the biggest problem in this nation, and unfortunately, is not just the police. Police are one major segment, but you got to look at racism that runs rampant all throughout our community. You look at our U.S. Senate. You look at what's happening in a lot of places in corporate America. You look at what's happening in our neighborhoods. You look at what's happening in fair housing. So racism, period, is a challenge. The police are one segment of that. And so when you look at our problem that we have, and let me say, there are some great corporate leaders that I really am happy they're finally stepping up, because there's some people that don't listen to anybody else but corporate America because it's about the their bottom line. And so it's time for all of these folks who have their influences to step up and stop this madness. But racism is not just caused by police, and we need to make sure we understand our systemic problems in our school systems are killing us. And so what we've got to do is definitely make sure there are assignments in our community that folks are going to take the assignments. We still got to deal with education because we are being killed in education, in our educational system. We got to deal with the economy. The people who are going to be out of jobs after this COVID-19, and 40%, they're predicting 40% of all Black businesses won't reopen after COVID-19. Our problem is basically global, but these police we got to deal with, and then we have to deal with our young people because we got to stop the violence in our community, and that's what we got to have the attention there too. But there are so many things, but I would say again, when we come together, we unite, and we also support the young leadership too. That's what's going to change this thing. And again, having the corporate leadership engaged and involved, because some have really come out in strong ways that they are helping to drive the needle on other folks who don't want to listen to anybody else.
Now, what's the practical thing? What's the practical thing? Racism is a Brobdingnagian problem. It's abstract. Killing people with bullets is concrete. I know the school's killing them. Asbestos ain't got a gun. It ain't got a badge and it ain't got a shield.
Killing their minds, Michael.
Huh?
Killing their minds.
I know that.
People unemployed.
But
look at racism housing.
I done wrote 22 books on that. I agree with all that. But here's my point. You got to stay alive long enough to fight racism. If you ain't alive to do nothing. Them bullets is killing your black ass.
My brother, I'm with you, but it ain't just the police, Mike. It's everybody. Police are just one thing.
Can a millennial get a moment?
Please jump in. Please jump in. Mike and I just.
Why these millennials always want to talk? Why they always want to talk?
And Dr. Dyson, I am a Baptist preacher, but you.
Oh, very good, very good. I can hear that.
The virtual doors of the church open. I will say, I think there's a trilateral transformation that really needs to take place with public education, with policing, but also with poverty. The late great Zora Neale Hurston mentioned the whole aspect in her book, Their Eyes Are Watching God. She said, if you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. And so I think really in regards to public education, how will students, if you think about this, they were just passed on from grade to grade this year. There was no proficiency, the level of what it is that they showed for, they were just passed on to the next grade. They're being promoted without proof of proficiency. Then you think about it, something's wrong in America, and I live on the east side of Detroit, when you can just drive 30 minutes north and get a better education because you're of a lighter hue. where Black people are under medication, but also indoctrination. And you think about, sadly, $55 million is spent on policing schools in Detroit, but not educating our children. I think the whole aspect of the police reformation and Dr. Dyson and I said Dr. Dortch, they've been going back and forth on it. But I want to bring this to the place. It begs the question, when you think about police reformation, if you don't live in this community, why do you want to police in this community? Right. I think that's really some of the thing that we need to begin to think about. You know, you got the good cop, bad cop. They always say, you know, it's only one or two bad police officers, but you can't be one or two bad pilots. You know, you can't be a bad doctor who botches a surgery. Then I think the third part of it is the poverty aspect. And you think about white households compared to Black households, they bring in $800,000 more than Black household. It's 10 times more than Black households make according to the U.S. Federal Reserve. And so Dr. King died on April 4th, 1968, but the day before, April 3rd, he mentioned the whole aspect of redistributing the wealth. I remember reading Dr. Dyson's book and as a sophomore in college, I may not get there with you. And he talked about the whole aspect of reinvesting into our communities, divesting from what it is with corporations. So when we do have that $1.3 trillion, not just spending power, but wealth, I think now we have to tap into the Black dollar power and really do reverse looting. We do reverse looting by selective spending. We can vote with our pocketbook and say, you know what, if I don't have a Black business, I'm gonna support a Black business. If I am a Black business owner, I'm gonna still support a Black business. And I think that's how we get the level of mobility and upward mobility in regard to that public education, policing, and then dealing with poverty pragmatically.
One of the things that I want to do is go to some of our audience questions. This question is, what are your plans for ensuring that all votes will be counted? We now know the midterm elections for the marginalized communities had a lot of troubles with being able to cast their vote physically. This was not by accident. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think voter education is so critical, given the fact that this pandemic has happened. So we're encouraging, first of all, you can't join our church without being a registered voter. If you join Alfred Street and you're not a registered voter, we're going to take care of that before we give you the right hand of fellowship, because you cannot claim to be a socially aware Christian and not be registered, not even have the possibility of voting. Vote.org is critical for people to understand their status within their state and what the election policies are going to be forthcoming. Listen, you are not just going to get a mail-in ballot. If you don't want to go to the polls because of a fear of COVID, the government is not just going to send you a ballot and say, okay, take care of this at home. It's important for our people to understand the process for voting in your local municipality and make certain that if you're going to do your absentee ballot, you request it, you get it in, and then you can check to make certain that your vote was actually counted. So often, I think not only do we miss our opportunity to vote, but we're not engaged in the process of understanding how the votes are collected, how they're counted, and making certain that I did my civic duty. Beyond that, without voting, you cannot serve in jury pools. So as we look at this whole justice system, part of the reason these white officers are not indicted is because when they go to the grand jury, there are none of us on there because we didn't vote. So it's for us, it's an empowering of understanding how all this ties in together with our civic responsibility, making certain we know the policies, and making certain you don't look at jury duty as, oh man, you know, I got to go sit in this. No, you've got an opportunity to be part of the justice system right now by accepting your jury duty responsibility. So for us, it's about this education, the registration, and making certain we know what the voting policies are in your local community. Vote.org. You need to go on there and check it out, and then check on these politicians who are running. Anyone who's running, you ought to be able to Google them and see their entire platform. If you don't see their entire platform, they shouldn't even be running. If I can't find out what your stance is on X, Y, and Z, and it's not out there, I either need to hold you accountable for it and send that out to you, or determine that you're not someone I'm going to vote for. And let's make certain, and I know Dr. Dyson will agree on this, let's not vote on one issue. Let's not vote on one issue.
Right.
And listen, we're not going to have a perfect candidate, right? You're not. So do what Republicans did. Hold your nose and vote, right? You're not going to find a perfect candidate. Hold your nose and vote. So when I hear like Sean Diddy Combs and others out there talking about hold the vote hostage, man, you're selling out Black people saying stuff like that. You are selling out the Black community. You are selling us out. hold your nose and vote, because we've got to change this entire land. And if you're out there making noise and angry, but you're not going to vote out the people who are held responsible and voted for this justice, then you're not doing anything at all other than marching the streets, making a whole lot of noise. So don't just march. Hold your nose and vote.
You know what I'm saying? I got an amen on that. I got an echo chamber on that. That's my pastor. I don't know what Jamal Bryant said. That's my pastor.
My pastor said the same thing.
I don't know what Jamal Bryant saying, collecting them money down there. But I'm just telling you what my man. Here's my point. Here's my point.
Jamal said the same thing. You can't talk about my frat brother.
Tell him. And I'm going to bring Michael to Newburgh and put him in the pulpit.
Oh, listen
whenever
here.
we reopen.
Wait a minute. Jamal already invited me, man. I'm good. But here's my point. Here's my point. What Dr. Wesley just said is so important. Why? Just the other day, Donald Trump got through like a bizarre high number of federal judges. Long after he is gone, he has shaped the federal judiciary and the local judiciary in a way that will hurt us systematically and structurally. That's number one. Number two, what Dr. Wesley is talking about, what they technically call voting down ballot. That means you ain't just voting for the president, even though when you vote for the president, you're voting for these federal judges and you're voting, guess what? For the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court.
So John Roberts, for the last 2 times, I don't know what he's doing. He must be looking at some Malcolm X speeches or reading Martin Luther King Jr. or something, because he done decided, he's done said, Anthony Kennedy is gone, I'm gonna be the swing vote. But here's my point. Donald Trump has placed 2 people on the Supreme Court. And if he gets reelected, he might have 4 people altogether that he's put on there. That is devastating. Number 2, life. Down ballot in terms of prosecutors. When Dr. Wesley said, if you ain't voting, you ain't on no jury, guess what? You can't even vote for who the dadgum prosecutor is if you ain't in the game. And the prosecutors determine whether the cases are going to be brought for the first time, in the first place, to these grand juries. Thirdly, we got to vote for these governors, because look at what Andrew Cuomo did. Anytime there is a police-involved shooting, there is automatically a special prosecutor. Do you know how huge that is? That means you bring in, a figure who is not beholden to the cops. Again, but if we abolish them, then we have to worry about that. But until we do, we're going to be beholden to them. And then fourthly, when we talk about voting down ballot, look at these local state legislatures. They have done more damage to us on the ground locally than even what Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and those folk are doing. And what they ingeniously did on the right, what they call ALEC, they got that pattern of voting in conservative fashion that they've passed around, that they mimic from state to state. They got their stuff together, and they are killing us. So I end by saying this. What Dr. Wesley said is so important. I tell young people, and I love them. I love the millennials and the post-millennials and Generation Z and everybody else. But here's the point. We've been in this game. Y'all new to this. I get it. And you don't get your way. Oh, my God, it didn't go my way. Welcome to the game. And as Joe Biden said, right, and I know these 2 preachers on here can take this, I ain't running against the almighty. I'm running against the alternative. Hello. I'll let that dog. And the thing is that, as Dr. Wesley said, hold your nose. And if you're voting next to Tommy Dortch, hold your pocketbook too.
Okay, so we are down to like the last few seconds. But I do want to ask this last question, because this is a question that is from the audience, but as I said earlier, I have been asked as well. Many white people and friends have asked, how can they help? What are some things that they can do right now?
Well, they need to have their voices heard first. You can't sit and be the silent majority, and that's really it. The majority of folks who could change things don't want to come out, don't want to get their hands dirty, don't want to talk. So one, they need to speak up and speak out in every opportunity they have, instead of telling us, I'm with you and I'm your friend, and you don't hear their voices. So one, they've got to speak up and speak out. They've got to vote in and out people too, because in the office. So that's very important. We have the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. Melanie Campbell and the group does a phenomenal job. It's made up of 70 Black organizations, and we come together collectively trying to coordinate. We have the legal defense fund, all of them when we have those election day problems. So one, our friends, Mike and I got some good white friends. They're let me be true. There are some great people working regardless of color out here trying to make a difference. And we've got to not be about, this is all us Black folks. It's got to be all of us. And so that's one of the things, and keep them engaged and involved. But the other thing, before we go, if everybody watched Georgia, it was a nightmare on election night last Tuesday. And it gave us a prelude of what we got to be prepared for. People stayed in line for 6 hours to vote. That's determination. That was so encouraging, even as bad as the system. But rest assured, we're kicking butt down here now. And we also are activating across this country, especially in the southern states, to make sure, we know they're going to try and steal the election. But we can't sit around and let them do it. We got to be prepared. And so one, we need young people who are willing to be poll watchers and poll workers, because the elderly aren't coming out because of COVID-19, because they're afraid and they're in that target group with preconditions. So one, we got to get young people to say, I'm going to work at the polls on election day. A lot of people didn't show up on election day. We had half of the machines, voting machines, locked up. We're dealing with that now in a general special session of the General Assembly. So the bottom line is, we want all of our friends. This tent is big enough for everybody to be in, because what people have to understand, our good white friends and our Latino friends and all those, whatever happens in our case happens to America. And it can't be, that's just Black folks, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together, as they say, but we got to realize we're in this together.
I said we got to read, we got to reflect. They gotta have individual reparations accounts where they ain't got to wait for the government to do stuff. If you see a kid in a local school and you see that they are jacked up and they need 20 computers, use your resources to do that. Use your corporate institution, finance to do that. They got to not be complicit with white supremacy. And the most important thing a white person can do is tell another white person what to do. They got to go home for Thanksgiving and they got to tell their mamas and their daddies and their grandmamas and their cousins, and guess what? They're young people too, who are full of white supremacist ideals and ideas, to change their ways. That's why Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, is so important, because white folk can sometimes only hear from white folk. And when they do that, we have the best chance of changing. As for Black folk, get off the poll and go to the polls on voting day. That would be an important thing.
Lashay?
I mean, you guys said it all. I think it's definitely important that they need to speak up and speak out, and also be willing to get uncomfortable. Be willing to lose it all, because that's essentially, if you believe in it, you got to be willing to lose it all. They still want to speak, but they want to whisper because they're afraid of losing what they have, and that's that privilege. And really understand that. So I know we're getting close on time, so I'm going to stop there, but yeah, that's what I think.
Eddie?
I'll echo that and say we need to move from sympathy and empathy to equity. We don't just need you to feel sorry for us, have mercy on us, or pity us. We want justice throughout our city. We want justice in the streets. We want justice in the community. We need to do more than just paint roads that just say Black Lives Matter. We don't need just ABC now having a Black Bachelor. Netflix giving all the shows that are American history related, a movie anthology. We didn't ask you to cancel the TV show Cops. We just want you to cancel and convict bad cops. And more than just charges, we want convictions. We want you to speak up, not just when we're in front of your face. We want you to speak up for us when your back is turned. And so I think it moves from symbolic smoke screens to real systemic and substantive change is what is needed and what is necessary. And if you're a true, real white brother or white sister, especially as a pastor, especially as an evangelical, what matters most are Black lives and not just Black ties.
And bring Sanford and Son back. Yeah.
And get some of those Black folks who've been successful to quit being quiet and staying at home and get their butts out here in the street, or either sending their dollars and get involved, because they're Black people who are so comfortable, they don't want to get their hands dirty. So Black folks need to understand how they got to where they are. So we got to get our good white folks and get some of our Black folks to understand we all got to work together, because some folks will sit back, want us to fight, fuss, be out in the streets, fight the battles, and they want to get a check for their businesses and all. All of us got to work on this.
Man, stop talking about new birth like that.
Pastor Wesley. I'm about to mute both of y'all.
My answer's simple. For white allies, white people have to call out white people. It's just really that simple. When you see it and you're exposed to it, you have to challenge it within their hearts. That's the only thing that brings it out. For our white allies to see racist language, systemic racism in your corporations, even within your families, and have the courage to say, you know, that's wrong. And I think that's where you begin to expose it and begin to eradicate it within someone's heart. Because Dr. Dyson was right. Sometimes white people only hear from white people.
I want to thank all of you for being a part of this conversation tonight. I pray that it is helpful to all of our viewers. So from Dr. Dyson to Tommy Dortch, Dr. Eddie Connor, Bache, Pastor Howard, John Wesley, I just thank you for taking the time to have this conversation because I do believe that it is an important conversation that we are starting. And this conversation will not end here. We are going to be putting together an action plan, which you will be able to opt into. All you have to do is text I am Black to 31996, and you will be able to get an alert when that is ready. So this does not end from the documentary to the education, but with evolving and working together. All right, that is our program for tonight. I pray that you have enjoyed the I Am Black experience. Any last, y'all want to say thank you to the viewers or anything? Nothing? Y'all want me to
Thank you for the invite. Glad to be on.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. And we're going to have a changing of pulpits exchange between New Birth and Alpha Street, and we're going to show you how it's done.
Come on down.
I'll take New Birth in a minute. I'll take New Birth in a minute, but I ain't leaving Alpha Street for nothing.
I was about to say, you better.
Michael, I'm going to pray for you, Michael. I'm going to pray for you.
Wait a minute.
We're going to have a prayer meeting for
Sunday.
you.
We ain't talking about forever. We talking about one Sunday. And give the man a good collection. That's all I'm saying to you. Give the man a collection.
All right, y'all. That is our show for tonight. Before we go, I definitely have to say Happy Father's Day to all of our panelists who are fathers. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And we thank you for all of the work that you do, not only in your communities, but in your homes, because we need you as leaders in both. So happy Father's Day to you all. And a special happy Father's Day to my dad, and I'm a total daddy's girl. So happy Father's Day, Dada. All right, so for everyone else, I pray that this hour has provided you with the ammunition you need to tap into your greatest and contribute to the movement, to create a truly, truly United States. All right, to keep with the conversation, be sure to text I am Black to 31996. All right, until next time, be blessed.